Why are there so few women in York's history? In general history books about York, 90% of the people mentioned are men. It's mainly his story. But what about her story? Women are 51% of the population, so what have they been doing? In 2018, Herstory.York, a grassroots community project, were inspired by the 100-year centenary since some women over 30 got the vote. They started to find 100 women who have helped to make York the place it is today.
We wanted to make invisible women visible, to make people more aware of the contributions and achievement of women. Finding 100 changemakers wasn't easy. We didn't know who they were or where to find them. We looked in archives, books, old newspapers and asked community members who we should include.
Wealthy women were easier to find. Women of colour, those with disabilities or living in poverty, members of the LGBT community and other minority groups were much harder to find.
Much more work needs to be done to find these women and to tell their stories.
So why are so few women mentioned in history books? Were we just not important enough to get a mention? Who wrote these history books?
Sometimes the words men or man are used to describe all people.
Most women had low status, with little power or money.
We were often poorly educated compared to our brothers.
Women were expected to look after the home and have children.
We were barred from the professions and discouraged from careers.
We were told that girls can't do things.
From boys will be boys attitudes in nursery or school, to jobs for boys and jobs for girls views among some parents, these gender stereotypes are deeply embedded and they last a lifetime.
Pioneering women in the early 20th century. World War I had a huge impact on all areas of British society, including women. It was a time of great loss, and with so many men killed, some women would never marry. This was also a time of opportunity. In 1918, some women over 30 years old finally got the vote. This was after much campaigning by the suffragettes. Universities were finally starting to open up their courses to women. This meant that wealthier women could now have the same education as men. New technology offered new ways of working and different types of careers for women. However, for most women, their working life was short, as they were expected to stop work when they got married and when the men returned from war. Let's have a look at some examples of pioneering women.
Helen Little noticed that most of the memorials were dedicated to men who had fought in the First World War, and that women's contributions were going unnoticed.
Helen is a changemaker, as she strongly believed it was important to also highlight the tremendous contribution that women had made. She did this by restoring the Five Sisters window, by women for women, at York Minster. This memorial includes 1,400 women's names who gave their lives in World War I. She said, "I often thought that our sisters who also made the same sacrifice appeared to have been forgotten. Helen helped to change all that at York Minster."
Dr. Catherine Crane has had a real impact on women's health, and particularly on preventative health. She campaigned tirelessly about the link between lung cancer and smoking. In 1936, she became the Assistant Medical Officer of Health and was also the Chief Medical Officer for Maternity and Child Welfare in York. By 1946, Catherine was York's Medical Officer of Health, covering all areas of health for 22 years.
Let's focus now on wartime women. The Second World War was a time of terrible conflict which tore countries apart and led to the deaths of over 60 million people.
Women played an important role during this wartime period, when men were called away to serve in the war, as they stepped in to help run many of Britain's important industries and services. Many women took on and learnt new skills for new and quite demanding jobs sometimes, working in very dangerous conditions, such as in factories making bombs.
However, when the war came to an end, women had to leave their jobs to make way for men returning from the war. These local women stand out and made strong wartime contributions.
Mary Story Richmond, 1923 to 2018, was one of many women who retrained, she'd been working at Rowntree's, to make bombs. It was very dangerous work because of the high risk of explosions. Also, if any of your hair was showing, it would turn orange. Later on, Mary worked on the railways and even operated a signal box.
Joan Moore was only 19 years old whilst working as a part-time air raid warden when the Luftwaffe bombed the city of York on the 28th of October 1940.
She was highly praised for her actions on that day, helping to warn and protect local residents from harm.
We are now focusing on the mid-20th century onwards, and in particular on women at work. After the war, many people in Britain hoped to return to a more settled way of life. From the 1960s onwards, it was a period of challenge and change in society.
Women's lives changed a great deal as divorce was more possible, birth control more available, and young women were able to leave home more easily for work or study. However, a woman's place was still mostly seen to be in the home.
These women stand out as having made an impact in their work.
Brenda Swinbank, who was born in 1921, was a groundbreaking researcher and archaeologist. She was a changemaker because she was the third British woman to be awarded a PhD on the archaeology of Britain and later carried out a really important excavation on the York Minster in 1973.
Dolly Cooper, 1921 to 2012, was an active politician and trade unionist for over 40 years in York after the war. She even became Lady Mayoress for York in 1984 and then Lady Sheriff in 1988 and 1996.
Let's now look at more women changemakers, this time from the 1980s and onwards. Changes in the law helped protect women's rights. Women began to have more choice and control over their lives, along with greater financial independence.
Changes such as the contraceptive pill became available to more women than ever before, meaning women now had more control over the size and timing of their family. Finally, women could now get a mortgage, open their own bank account, or have a credit card.
Let's have a look at some changemakers.
Violet Cannon comes from a traditional gypsy family background. As a changemaker in York, she has led the York Travellers Trust since 2018 and is the first ethnic gypsy to be appointed to such a role in Yorkshire.
Evie Holder set up York Racial Equality Network in 1994, and she has been very active in supporting those worried about harassment, racial attacks or discrimination. Amy Tyro is a successful footballer and coach in York. She played county football for York as well as with Leeds United, winning the League Cup. She's a coach with York City Foundation. Some of those coached by Amy have successfully gone on to play for England under 15s.
Women changemakers with their vision and energy continue to affect life in York, making it a better, safer place for women in society and where equality of opportunity is much more possible. What changes do you think are still needed?